Did you see the stylish kids in the riot, shoveled up like monks at the night on fire, wombles bleed, truncheons and shields, you know I cherish you, my love.
Welcome to the Young IPA podcast. I'm James.
G'day everyone.
It is the 4th of June and this is episode 112. We have a loaded show for you guys coming up. This is a big one. So we're going to start off with another interview that I got when I was at the Freedman Conference a few weeks ago with Grover Norquist, head of Americans for Tax Reform. This guy is a big player. If anyone's seen the movie Vice, he is listed as one of the enemies of the people in that movie.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we talk about that with him. He basically, if you've heard of these like famous Wednesday meetings over in the US or the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, this is the guy that made all of it possible and created it all. Big fish. So we're going to be talking to him about his life and tax reform in general, what it's like being a bad guy in Vice, and why he goes to Burning Man every single year.
Does he?
He does.
That's another thing I didn't know. I can't wait to listen to this interview.
Yeah, which, you would think by now Peter would have listened to the interviews, but he's not. He's a man that enjoys living life on the edge.
No, I'll take him fresh.
Yeah. And we're also going to be talking to Daily Telegraph columnist Miranda Devine. Now, she had a great article. Basically, she was with the Morrison camp for the final day. No, just after the election, she interviewed so many people that were involved in Morrison's campaign and gets a whole lot of behind-the-scenes stories about what the last few days were like, why Scott Morrison was convinced basically from the outset of the campaign that he was going to win, despite every poll showing that he wasn't. He had other polls that said he would. So we talk about that. Also touch on Israel Folau and what Labor's response has been to losing the election, which I think transitions nicely into what we want to start talking about, which is Bill Shorten doesn't quite get it, Pete.
Well, he doesn't.
No. So basically, Bill, it's a tough loss. It's a tough loss. People are going to process a loss like that in different ways. Doesn't quite get it. So Bill is quoted here in the ABC. He's saying about what Labor was up against. And instead of looking at maybe his own tax policies, maybe the reliance on climate policies, we've got here, but obviously we were up against corporate leviathans, a financial behemoth, spending unprecedented hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising, telling lies, and spreading fear. And he also took aim at the media in general. So, Pete, corporate leviathans or financial behemoth or both? What do you think was behind Labor's loss?
Well, they're pretty similar, though, both of those things.
No. One's a corporate and a leviathan, which I believe is a fish creature in Greek mythology, and then a financial behemoth, which I think is more of a land thing. My knowledge coming from Age of Mythology.
Well,
great game for those who still have PCs.
I don't know what any of that stuff is, but that's good that you're across that. Look, I think that, as Gideon Rosner said on Twitter, I think Bill's very unlucky. He only had the ABC, he only had the union movement, he only had Get Up, he only had the universities, he only had, the unions and everything else.
How could anyone expect him to win with such few foot soldiers in his army?
Exactly right. He only had the education system, which is, churning out left-wing people every single day. Well, once a year, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
So, and they actually had more corporate donations, apparently, the Labor Party.
Okay, very good point, Pete. Now, we did have to pause the show because there was a passing ambulance. So in that time, I have shown Pete the difference between a behemoth and a leviathan. So, Pete, if you had to choose between a corporate leviathan and a financial behemoth to be on your side, you're going to be up against someone who's got the other. What would you pick?
The second.
The behemoth?
Yeah.
Just keep it on land.
Yeah, you're a land creature.
Yeah.
What good is the leviathan if it's in the sea?
Well, Canberra is a swamp, so maybe we can get the leviathan into that swamp area.
Never go there.
No, okay, fair enough. Cool. So, interesting one for Labor because Anthony Albanese has sort of said, okay, we need to reconnect with people. And Joel Fitzgibbon was on Q&A last night talking about how, they need to broadcast the fact that they're not anti-coal a bit more. But then you've got Bill Shorten saying, actually, the problem was not with us. It was with everyone else and the fact that they were against us.
I think that's a good point. Albanese's making the right sounds about reconnecting with ordinary people, as we sort of mentioned last week. And I'm sure you talk about this with Miranda Devine.
Yes.
He did say in the party room, we're still the party of change, etc., etc. So, it'd be interesting to see what he actually does.
Yeah.
I think the point with Shorten, though, is we can get complacent on our side of politics because we win so many elections. Like the coalition's won 7 out of 10 elections or whatever.
Yeah.
And over the
I
course...
object to we, but okay.
Oh, not we, but
Okay,
this, the liberal centre-right coalition, blah, blah, blah. So, and they've won, 32 out of 46 elections over the whole course of Australia or whatever. Yet it still, and John Roscombe says this, it still feels like Labor runs the country.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's more levers in society apart from, parliamentary politics, and the left controls all the other ones.
Yeah, exactly. So, my main point is this is a tough look for the ABC and Fairfax Papers because if Bill Shorten says that the media is out to get him, that means they're just they don't get watched by the most powerful left-wing figure in the country.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's bad news for them.
That is bad news for
if he
them.
thought the media was out to get him, that means he's never turned on ABC once in his life.
You would have thought $1 billion funding a year would get you Bill Shorten occasionally to have a look at what you're putting on, but apparently not.
Apparently not, which is a tough look for them. Speaking of elections, Pete, a pretty interesting poll came out in the UK.
Well, that's right. So we all knew that the European elections happened recently in Britain, where the Brexit Party got the most seats. They've done a poll recently in the last couple of days of British people about who they would vote for if there was a Westminster election happening right away, so a general election. And for the first time, the Brexit Party has actually hit the top of the Westminster polls. It suggests that 100 Conservative Party seats are at risk, as well as Labor's seats. The Lib Dems have also made big increases. I'll give you a few actual percentages. So Brexit's on 26%, Labor 22%, the Conservatives 17% in third. Lib Democrats up to 16%, and then the Greens on 11%.
The also Rans, yes.
And then Change UK making a huge impact on 1%. So Nigel Farage for PM.
Yeah, that seems to be it. So basically breaking that down through seats, it would leave Farage 20 seats short of a majority.
Really?
Which is pretty crazy. With 306 MPs, the Conservatives would be reduced to 26 MPs in total, suggesting they could be a minor party in a coalition with Farage. So Prime Minister Farage, minor party, Conservatives.
Now, that would get Brexit done.
That would get, well, it might be the only way to do it. The other parts, the other statistics from these polls I like. So Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn continue to have incredibly low ratings on the question of who would make best Prime Minister. Both are only on 15%. With 60% undecided.
So that is huge.
Yeah. Well, I would love 15% of people to think I'd be good at my job. But apparently this is a bad thing for Theresa May to have over her.
Well, this is why she's fallen on her sword.
Yeah.
I would point out the next election isn't due till 5th of May 2020.
And there will be
2022.
and there will be a new Prime Minister in that time.
Yeah.
So it does look like it's going to be Boris Johnson. And this is the biggest indicator I've ever seen that, you might need to do a no-deal Brexit because that is what your base wants.
It's almost like that's what they want.
Imagine, after the election, there are only 26 Conservative MPs. That would be
incredible.
so wild.
Do you know where's that fit with their? We probably don't know where that fits in with their worst ever historical.
I mean, that'd be pretty damn bad. I mean, the European elections that just passed was their lowest vote share in a national election since they formed in 1834, which is not good. I did some further research and found out that is a not good result.
That's good to see you going the extra mile.
Yeah. So I would imagine that 26 seats would, if that's not the lowest, I would be absolutely shocked.
And let's not forget, in the House of Commons, there's about 4 million seats. It's not
exactly.
like Australia. There's thousands of them.
Which should be a good thing, but that is a discussion for another day.
It is.
Now, there is also another story here, Pete.
Yep.
And I forgot which one it was, so help me out here.
I think you're doing whistleblower.
Oh, yeah. So, all right, let me posit this to you, Pete. What should we as a society give to someone who finds out that the ATO staff are being instructed to use aggressive debt collection practice known as garnishing notices, which basically allows the ATO to seize funds from the bank accounts of Australian taxpayers without notice or consideration of circumstances. And they are basically categorically instructed to take money out of people's bank accounts when due process hasn't been followed. Now, what, as we as a society, should we give to the person that found that out?
Well, probably less than someone that murders someone.
Yeah, because apparently we're giving him 161 years in jail.
Oh, okay.
That's what he's up for.
That sounds great.
This story broke. It's come out amidst, the makeup of the Senate. There's one key crossbencher who's really brought this case forward. Is we should let this guy go.
Yeah.
So his name is Richard Boyle. He's facing more than 160 years in prison if convicted of breaching laws on handling public documents and recording phone calls when he spoke out on the ATO's mistreatment. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of famous examples around the world of this, like Julian Assange and stuff like that. This is the biggest one that Australia's had because, Julian Assange is an Australian, despite how much the left wing would love him to be Australian or would have loved him for a time. But, this is crazy.
Oh, look, absolutely. The fact that this can happen to someone who's preventing Australians' money from being taken from them by the tax office in a pretty dodgy way is incredible. I understand there's state secrets and things like that, but this is a huge thing. The person you were talking about from the Centre Alliance Party, Senator Rex Patrick, is a big supporter. He pointed out that the ATO's internal inquiries following this guy's whistleblowing found out that they were doing wrong things. They had 2 inquiries. They both found out he was doing the wrong thing.
So the
and
fact
he's
that
facing a jail term of 161 years.
Yeah. So, hey, really good work finding out all of the things that we're doing wrong. We're going to stop doing those things wrong. but you're going to jail for 160 years.
It is just it's such a bad message to
yeah,
send
so
to people.
hopefully this guy gets off. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on it, so, we'll watch this space, I guess.
And he did point out the human cost on what's actually occurred to him is, had some pretty dark moments and it's taken a huge toll on his mental health and all the rest of it.
160 years hanging over my head would be something.
That's right.
Yeah.
They wouldn't.
That's a long time, Pete.
It is. It is a long time. So it took me a while for me to register what you were saying there. But yes, that is a long time. All right. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So 3 days before the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, Twitter suspended the accounts of dissident Chinese political commentators. Now, at first it was like, why is Twitter doing the job of the Chinese government? Because actually you can't access Twitter in China unless you have a cool workaround, which a lot of these dissidents do. But then it emerged that it was in fact an accident. This hit more than 100 users, including human rights lawyers, activists and college students.
Oh, it was an accident?
Yeah, it was an accident.
Oh, right, yep.
So you're
No, I'm just saying it was an accident. It was a complete accident that all these accounts got suspended.
So you're sceptical. That's what this is.
Well, don't get me in legal trouble, Pete. I'm just pointing out that it's. I just want to mention again that it was an accident.
All right. Well, fair enough. Twitter said these accounts were not mass reported by the Chinese authorities. This was routine action on our part. The Chinese government actually have what's called the Internet Police, which track down people that are on Twitter and make them delete their, profiles and delete all the tweets they've ever made, and I'm sure other stuff as well. But that's how chilling that is. Now, look, people sort of said, this is a terrible thing, and they're surprised by it. Look, Twitter is an authoritarian left-wing organisation. Who's surprised that they would act like the Chinese government?
Yeah, exactly. Like, they've been shutting down people for tweeting learn to code.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a step too far removed.
The Chinese government wouldn't stand for that.
All right, over at IPA.org.au, head over there to keep up with what the IPA is doing. And it's basically been structured around two main things this week. So we've got a new parliamentary research brief and economic policy agenda for mainstream Australia. This is basically a document that Daniel Wild and Andrew Bushnell put together to talk about what the future of the economy should be in Australia. Like, what are the key things that make up a mainstream Australia? What are the key values, and how can we build an economic agenda to encourage those values? And also with a lot of minimum wage stuff this week. So you had Gideon Rosner talking about minimum wage and all the harms that it can do to society's most vulnerable. And then finally, you've got John Lloyd in The Australian talking about how the public service is so disassociated from mainstream Australian values because basically everywhere in the country voted Liberal, except for Canberra, which was overwhelmingly Labor. So that disconnect and what that can mean for Australian society as a whole.
Made a big splash, that one.
It did. Didn't go down too well in Canberra. So that's it. Make sure you're also listening and downloading the IPA's Looking Forward podcast with Dr. Chris Berg and Scott Hargraves. They've got a really cool show for you guys coming up tomorrow. So, yeah, if you do like your analytical political fix, make sure you're downloading that one as well as this one. And if you are listening to both of those podcasts through iTunes, make sure you're leaving us a 5-star rating. Really helps us out with the show. Really helps us bring the podcast to new people. All right, cool. Let's go to those interviews now. Okay, we are now joined by Grover Norquist, the founder and president of Americans for Tax Reform. So we're coming to you live from the ALS Friedman Conference. So thanks again for Tim Andrews and all the people involved letting us here. So Grover, you're famous for a lot of things. You've got the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, the Wednesday meeting. So why have you devoted your professional career to cutting taxes?
I think cutting taxes is where the rubber hits the road on the size of the state, the power of the state, and the relationship between citizens and the state. If taxes are unlimited, then the power of the state over the individual is unlimited. If taxes are limited and controlled, then the power of the government over people is limited and controlled. So that's why that's the zone to fight in.
Yeah. I'd say Trump's tax cuts recently are a huge victory for you and the sort of tax cut program as a whole. So what was your take on that, and what's the effect on the American economy been?
Sure. The Trump tax cut was extremely helpful. We cut the corporate rate from 35%, which oddly enough was the worst in the world, higher than communist China, higher than Germany, higher than France, higher than Sweden, higher than everybody, down to 21, which made us competitive with the rest of the world. Not really good, but okay. But it was a big swing for the United States. We took individual rates for every American down. We took small business rates down. And we ended the tax subsidy for local government taxes by not allowing you to deduct most of your state and local taxes. So you feel your state and local taxes completely. There's no discount. This has led to strong economic growth, millions of jobs. 3% growth, whereas for the previous 8 years we'd averaged about 1.8%. So you saw immediately within the first year a dramatic increase, almost a doubling of the rate of growth in the United States. And so this tremendously strengthens the modern Republican Party. Trump's own personal numbers have greatly strengthened. People's view of the economy has greatly strengthened. The number of small businesses has jumped up. It's been very important.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating to me that it's like a 35 to a 21% drop off, which is so out of what Australia's talking about. Like, we're having these debates about corporate tax reform, which are just like fiddling around the margins. There's so much Australia could learn from the Americans on this. So what are some of the lessons that we should be taking?
Well, I think dramatic reductions in the corporate rate give you growth that swamps any lost revenue from the lower rate. Second, look, the whole world is moving to lower rates. The United States was late to the game of taking the corporate rate down. When we were at 35% with Reagan's Tax Reform Act of 1986, we went down to 35 from 50. What was that all about? Well, that made us one of the lowest in the world then. The whole world saw how well it did for the United States, so they all went lower than 35. And we sat around for 30 years not moving. So we jumped to 21, and Trump and the Republicans have made it very clear they want to get to 15% next time we have an at-bat.
Yeah, do you reckon that's a viable option?
Yeah, I think it's very likely. If we get a Republican House, we'll get to 15%.
That's fantastic. So there's so many good stories that get told once tax cuts happen. Like you were just talking about the jobs and like there's more money in people's pockets. Yet the idea of I'm going to cut your taxes isn't the most, it's not the best way for a politician to go away with in the modern day. So why are tax cuts so hard to argue for?
Well, the establishment press generally takes dictation from government press releases, and so they always look at things from the government's perspective. That's why the press, the media, talks about a tax cut as costing money, meaning it costs the government. Now, taxes cost citizens, but they refer that as raising revenue. So you can tell the way the establishment press talks, they're standing in the shoes of the government, not in the shoes of citizens and taxpayers. And so they tend to belittle the idea of reducing taxes because it's their friends that get the government money, and they don't want to reduce that. The good news is, though, when people are asked whether they want higher taxes or lower taxes, people want lower taxes. Do they think they're too high taxed or not taxed enough? Overwhelmingly in the United States, people think taxes are too high. About 1 to 2% of people think taxes should be higher. Everybody else thinks they should be the same or lower. So it is a very winning political issue once you pull the trigger.
Yeah. It's the weirdest thing to me is like when people say like it's increasing revenue. It's like the idea that all money is government owned. It's just whatever scraps they leave people to have by themselves, rather than all money is people owned. It's whatever they give to the government.
Yes. The idea that the government is giving money to somebody if it cuts your taxes is the argument that when a mugger passes you on the street unmolested, he gave you your wallet.
Fantastic. So yeah, it's such an interesting topic, but as well as not exactly getting into the public about it, it certainly doesn't get to young people enough. Like young people don't really vote thinking about taxes. They vote thinking about all these other issues like social issues. So why do young people especially need to care about taxes?
Well, because it's their future. If you don't start saving now, when you get to retirement age, you won't have the money you need. If you're taxed and regulated out of a job for 5 years and you don't really get going until you're in mid-20s, you just don't have as much money when you retire. You can't earn as much over your lifetime. It's very important to people to get into the marketplace early and start earning and learning.
The other side of the Trump experience at the moment for America are the trade wars, and we're seeing a lot of talk about tariffs and what tariffs will be put in and what tariffs will be taken out. What's your take on all of that?
Tariffs are taxes, tariffs are taxes, tariffs are taxes. American tariffs on goods from China are a tax increase on the American consumer, the American citizen. Chinese people do not pay the tariffs on goods imported to the United States. Americans pay that. Now, the president has said his goal is to use tariffs as a weapon to get the Chinese to reduce their non-tariff barriers, their tariff barriers, and their theft of American intellectual property. He's quite right that we need to readjust our agreements with China because they're cheating. On the other hand, we didn't really fully ever make the Japanese reform their behavior, and we benefited from lower priced goods from Japan, and eventually the Japanese had all this malinvestment from government spending, and they had a decade, almost 2 decades, of very little growth. China's about to hit the same wall. So I'm less concerned about China. The next 30 years, 250 million more Chinese will be over the age of 55 and not under the age of 55. So you're talking about an incredible slice of the workforce is going to be into retirement, and it disappears because China's not having as many children. They're not replacing themselves. I was never scared of the Japanese, and I'm less scared of China as a competitor to the United States or to the West, because at the end of the day, we are getting through. I mean, they've moved so far from Maoist communism that the distance to turn into Sweden or France is a lot less of a distance than the distance they've traveled.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way, because everyone sort of pits it as Trump v. China or America v. China, but it's really like you end up being such a tax on the American people, like the spending power is taken away.
Yeah. I do think that at the end of the day, because the farmers, because the Republican congressmen and senators have told Trump, knock off the trade war, finish the trade war. They got Trump to get rid of the tariffs on steel and aluminum on Mexico and Canada in order to pass the upgraded version of the NAFTA deal, and Trump did. At some point, I believe the same conversation is being had with Trump on China. And there are people in China going to the Chinese leadership, would you knock this off? This is hurting our exports. People will, over time, decide to buy stuff from Vietnam and Malaysia and the Philippines and Japan, not China, if China keeps behaving the way it does. I wish we were not using tariffs as a weapon. I do understand the argument that we're trying to get China to redirect how it trades with us.
Yeah, all right, well, fingers crossed that the trade war is over pretty quickly. I want to talk to you about the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which is such an awesome thing and something Australia desperately needs. So how did that come well, first off, what is it, and how did it come about, and how many politicians have taken it up by now?
Sure. The Taxpayer Protection Pledge is a signed public statement that an elected official or a candidate for office says, I promise to the people of the United States, or to my state, that I will vote against any and all efforts to raise taxes. And then there are 2 witnesses, and it's dated, and it's signed. It's a contract. And it's not, as President Obama used to say, a contract with me personally, Grover Norquist, or Americans for Tax Reform. It is a contract with and an agreement to and a promise to the people of Arizona or the people of the United States. It is signed by more than 90% of all the Republican congressmen and senators in the U.S. House and Senate. Many governors, many state legislators, almost all Republicans. In the past, there have been some Democrats who signed either because they were about to lose an election if they didn't, or because they were one of the 5 Democrats who switched parties and became Republicans, or one of the 2 Democratic senators who switched parties and became Republicans. The pledge takers switched or lost. And it really is the dividing line between the 2 parties. There are some Democrats who won't steal your guns. There's some Democrats that are not pro-abortion. There's some Democrats who allow homeschooling or whatever. There's some Democrats who are free trade. There's no Democrat willing to promise not to raise your taxes. And there's almost no Republican who will raise taxes. Even the ones who haven't signed the pledge will tell you, oh, but I'm never going to raise taxes. I don't like to sign pledges or something. At the end of the day, this is what has stopped trillions of tax increases since 1986. It's been a major factor in American politics. It's what defeated George Herbert Walker Bush because he took the pledge and broke it. It's what defeated many people in primaries and in general elections because they wouldn't sign the pledge. They're running against somebody who did. I recommend it to all nations, a number of countries, Japan, Chile, Argentina, all have pledges that people use in those races. It's particularly helpful in primary elections in the United States.
Yeah, I was going to say this a little bit later in the show, but you were saying how Obama thinks it's a personal declaration to you, Grover Norquist, and that's kind of how you got involved with the movie Vice. I think you got mentioned by name on it. So what's it like being did you ever see it, and what's it like seeing your own name being read out?
I saw it 2 days ago when I flew here to Australia. It was on for free on the airplane. it was interesting because it was the left's caricature of the right. I mean, it's a caricature of Bush, it's a caricature of Cheney stuff. And in it, we have a Wednesday meeting, which is true, we do. It's in a large room, 150 people, 30 people present for 3 minutes each at every meeting. So a lot of people in the room, people from the House, the Senate, outside groups, think tanks, conservative journalists, writers, taxpayer activists.
A few of our staff members have spoken at it. So we've had a few people.
Australian state legislators, Australian members of parliament when they come over. We've had Australians working at Americans for Tax Reform. Tim Andrews was with us for a number of years. The goal is to get everybody in the Leave Us Alone coalition telling everybody else what they're doing. I need to know what the gun people are doing. I need to know what the Southern Baptists are doing. I want to know what the homeschool movement is doing, the legalized marijuana people. Everybody who's fighting for freedom, the vaping community, everybody who's fighting for freedom needs to be aware of their compatriots. Even they may not agree on every issue, but the guy who wants to go to church all day and be left alone, it has the same interest as a guy who wants to make money all day and be left alone. It has the same interest as a guy who wants to fondle his guns all day and be left alone. They want to be left alone. Okay? And each one looks at the other and says, that's not how I spend my time. It's not necessary that we agree what we do with our free time, but that we agree we should be left alone to do as we wish. And so freedom is not really divisible, and we need to make sure that everybody understands that your freedom to do whatever odd thing you want to do with your free time is up to you. And our job is just make sure everybody's free to behave as they wish, as long as they don't punch anybody else. So this center-right meeting has really allowed the center-right to, the people in that room represent 60% of the American electorate, everybody who voted for Reagan or would have if they were the right age. It is not the 150 most right-wing guys in town who all agree on everything. What's the point of that meeting? You want a meeting of people who are outward-facing, speaking to constituencies that are being brought into the freedom movement, not already in there for years and years. In 41 states, we have state versions of the meeting. A number of states have several meetings. California has 3, Florida has 3, Ohio has 3 meetings. And now 26 countries, including Australia, have similar meetings. I know that they're looking to set up a second one in Australia. I'm going through New Zealand, which has just set up a meeting, or reestablished a meeting. I'll be going to that in a few days. So it's wonderful to have not only across the United States, but throughout the world, meetings. And then we get together. We just had a meeting here with 8 different Asian center-right leaders. We've had other meetings where we bring all the Europeans together, people from around the world. And people say, well, here's how our center-right, our Leave Us Alone coalition is working in Argentina or Canada, or Poland, Britain, to see what works and how we can learn from each other.
Yeah, the staff members from the Institute of Public Affairs who have spoken at the meeting, they come back and they can't talk about anything else for at least a few months. I mean, it is a massive, massive deal to a lot of people. What's been what's been one of your favourite moments at one of these meetings?
Well, we had Ralph Nader come because he wanted to see it because he'd heard about the issue. He wrote a book about how the left could triumph if they got all the billionaires on the left to work together. And what's kind of fun is I'm the bad guy in that movie. It's not a movie. It's that in that book. It's 1,000 pages long. I don't know if anybody's actually really read the thing.
Maybe only Ralph Nader.
Yes, that's right. But he left that and was quoted in the papers as saying it's like a Marine barracks, it's cold, it's brutal, because people would pop up and talk for 2 minutes about how they were advancing liberty. And if you hear 30 people talk like that, and then Ralph wanted to talk to us about fighting corporate welfare, which we agree on, and term limits, which we agree on. So there's some issues that Ralph Nader and I have worked together on over the years. Transparency, every dollar the government spends should be up online so you can see it on a computer. That's largely accomplished in the United States, even at the local level. So those have been helpful. We had Al Gore come. He heard that Ralph Nader had been there, and he wanted to come. He was quite convinced if he spoke slowly and loudly enough, we'd understand the case for socializing the economy because of global warming.
Yeah, it works for inconvenient truth.
Climate change. Yeah. It was just before his movie came out that he came and talked. Yeah, he showed us some clips of it, and then he talked and took questions, and people got to ask their killer question of Mr. Global Warming, and they discovered that they didn't have killer questions. They had questions that were important, but he had learned how to, turn them aside. So people had fantasies, if I could only ask this one question, that I would collapse the global warming guy. But I asked our friend, Vice President Gore, I said, look, if the angels came down and sat on your shoulder and said, it's not cooling, it's not warming, it's not changing, or man isn't doing it, you told us that global cooling was solved by doing 10 things like riding bicycles and using less energy and having taxes, and then global warming was solved by riding bicycles and using less energy and having taxes, and now global climate change is solved by the same 10 things you're supposed to do, and ride bicycles and walk and be vegan or something. If an angel came down and stood on your shoulder and said it's not warming, it's not cooling, and man didn't do it, are there any of those 10 things you shouldn't do anyway? And before I'd finished the question, he said, no, you should do them all anyway. Meaning he had a list of 10 things he wanted to impose on the American people, and the reason for them kept changing. And to have that happen in front of 150 people was pretty cool. Right in front of us, I want you to do these 10 things. We have changed the reason from time to time. You have to do them, and we'll tell you why later. Yeah. Yes.
So with the Wednesday meeting, you've got this coalition of like-minded thinkers. You've got libertarians, you've got conservatives, the Leave Them Alone coalition, right? We've never really had anything like that in Australia. Like, the only thing that really combines classical liberals, libertarians, and conservatives is the Liberal Party. And, when the Liberal Party gets taken over by a politician that doesn't exactly espouse liberal values, which we've had for the last couple of years, the movement kind of falls apart. But the Leave Them Alone coalition is quite separate to the Republican Party. Ideological fellows and members of both, but, if the Republican Party falls, there's a Leave Them Alone coalition that can step in there and fight for coalition values. So, how did you foster such a movement?
Well, I realized that the old theory of how the modern Republican Party or the American conservative movement was structured was wrong. People said there are 3 legs to the conservative stool. Economic conservatism, free markets, social conservatism, and strong foreign policy. Well, there is a definition of what economic liberty means and economic conservatism means. It means free markets. Social conservatism, what? Does it mean one particular religion? Does the government impose it, or is this something you should do? And foreign policy, what does that mean? Lots of wars or few wars? Should we not engage with Europe like the founding fathers said, or should we be like neocons and blow up everything that annoys us? So it didn't make any sense. It didn't really hold together. Now, with the nature of the Soviet Union made it clear that you were at daggers drawn for quite some time. That masked the fact that there wasn't a unified view of what foreign policy should be absent a country trying to kill you every day. When that went away, now what's our foreign policy? And there wasn't an agreement. Better, I said, is to look at it as a collection of groups that on their vote-moving issue, they want to be left alone. Homeschoolers, let me educate my kids at home. Private school, let me go outside the public school system. Gun owners, leave my Second Amendment rights alone. Small businessmen, don't regulate my profession, my small business, independent contractors, non-union workers who don't want to be forced to pay union dues. All the religious liberty people, this is why evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, and Mormons who disagree on who gets to heaven and why and how, and in other countries they kill each other, all want to be left alone. There isn't one of them who thinks, I bet we could make everybody be a Baptist, because nobody has a monopoly like that, or could do that. So first choice might be everybody has to be my religion. Second choice is nobody tells anybody what to do. And that's the happy place we are in the United States with religious liberty. So if you ask the evangelicals questions like, do you think people in San Francisco act oddly on Saturdays and do you wish they wouldn't? Yes. Do you vote on that? No. What bothers you? I want to be left alone. I want to raise my kids. I want to transmit my faith to my kids. I don't want the government messing with me. So a lot of the social conservative issues are freedom issues if you just look at them right and go, what's the government doing to mess with people who care about traditional values, okay? It's not that the government has to impose traditional values. They just want the government not to upend their ability to raise their own kids and raise them as they'd like to. So that's why, somebody who wants to make money all day, someone who wants to have the Second Amendment rights, and somebody who wants to go to church all day. They're not in conflict. They're allies. They're friends. They want liberty to do what they want to do. If you understand that, then the Leave Us Alone coalition is coherent. It's not in conflict. Just because people want to do different things with freedom does not mean they're going to fight at all. Not in a political sense. I mean, they might want to argue all day about what you should do to go to heaven, but that's a personal issue, not a political issue where the government has any role. And so that understanding means you're constantly looking for new groups, vapors, homeschoolers, 1 million people who drive as independent contractors for Uber and Lyft and things like that. They didn't exist 15 years ago. Homeschoolers was illegal 40 years ago, and in 48 states, they were illegal. You go to jail for homeschooling, educating your kids at home. Now it's legal in all 50 states. So you find new issues that matter to people and bring them in. And then the Republican Party, which is also at the meeting, because they're a part of the broader Leave Us Alone coalition, not the whole thing, but they're a part of it. And people can move in on a particular issue and then decide if they want to get involved in campaigns or electing people or running for office themselves. Then the vehicle for political action is the party, not the coalition necessarily. And you get funneled through the coalition into a party and that understands I have to leave everybody alone. And if I have a new idea, you check. Does that step on anybody's toes in the Leave Us Alone coalition? And I know whenever somebody brings me some interesting idea, I look around the room. I say, does this step on anybody's toes? Am I missing how this messes with somebody or doesn't? And if it doesn't mess with anyone, then it's a welcome addition to the movement. And you want to bring them in and work with them.
All right, brilliant. Okay, so the last thing I need to ask you is about Burning Man. Yes. So we were talking about the Burning Man on this show a few weeks ago when they got hit with all the state regulations from Nevada. Yes. And we were talking about Burning Man, and I said it's the last place in the world you'll ever find me, but I know you've been an attendee at least once. So what is it about Burning Man that attracts you?
Yeah, I've been going every year since 2013. The founder of it was a friend, and we became friends, and he invited my wife and I out. And for the first 2 years, I couldn't go because it was the same week as school started for the kids. And then 1 year it was the same week as the Republican Party convention. And That's
a tough choice.
I tweeted, who is the idiot who put the Republican convention the same week as Burning Man?
You could have it at Burning Man, and that would really get the Leave Them Alone coalition together.
This would be good, yes. But I've gone every year since and intend to go for the rest of my life. It is a wonderful small L libertarian collection of people who come together and create an entire city for 7 days and then disassemble it, and there's nothing but the desert again. And it is voluntary exchange. It is people working together. There's 800-person sort of police force of people who just make sure everything's cool and nobody's bothering anybody else. And so it is. And it's an explosion of art and self-expression. Some people dress interestingly. Yeah. Some people build.
They undress interestingly.
Yeah. It's about 1 out of 100 people's not wearing all their clothes. That's if you think, I saw a lot of naked people, you weren't paying attention to the rest of what's going on. Although I did walk down that sort of main thoroughfare, and there was a guy roller skating on a setup that they built, one of those roller skating big U's. And I said, oh my goodness, that guy's not wearing knee pads. That's not safe. And my wife said, he's not wearing anything. My dad was a safety engineer. I noticed no knee pads. So anyway,
had he been wearing knee pads? No, there's no problem.
Yes, that's it. And I don't see any problem at all. So the good news is it is just delightful. It is a wonderful place to be, and it runs 24/7. It's lit up like Las Vegas at night with all self-generated efforts. People put a lot of work into it. People think, oh, it's like Woodstock. No, it's not. Woodstock was a bunch of hippies who forgot to bring gas money, gas, water, food, had to be bailed out by the National Guard. These are people who bring all of their stuff with them, and people do, trade back and forth stuff if they've forgotten things. And it is a real voluntary community that comes together because it wants to, and people just do very interesting things. I've done stand-up comedy out there. I've lectured. I lecture every year, I think, to the Psychedelic Drug Association people, and it's just wonderful to sit down and chat with people, share your. I always talk about the politics of liberty and how you expand liberty. It's great fun.
All right, this is the closest I've ever been to saying I'll go. Like I'm like 60% of the way there now, just off that. All right, Grover Norquist, Americans for Tax Reform, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're now joined by Daily Telegraph columnist Miranda Devine. Now, Miranda, you have written an incredibly in-depth, really candid feature about the final days of the Morrison campaign with Sharry Markson for the Daily Telegraph. I encourage everyone to go out and listen to it before this interview because, you know, there's going to be a lot of assumed knowledge because it's such a great article. You should read it anyway. So first off, how did this come about?
Well, our editor wanted us to write sort of an in-depth how the war was won feature for the Daily Telegraph straight after the election campaign. And so this was just in the first few days after the win that seemed to surprise most people except Scott Morrison. And so we got enormous access to all the people who were involved in that campaign. They were still in, you know, that thrill of the moment, still basking in that victory. So they were quite candid with us. And, you know, nobody was boastful. There was no hubris, but it was just a really interesting exercise in going right back to the very beginning of when Morrison became Prime Minister and how focused and determined he was, and how, you know, he had this belief that some people said was delusional, that he would become Prime Minister as the sort of, you know, the accidental candidate in that leadership coup, and then secondly that he would win the election, that he wasn't just there to save the furniture. He had that self-belief. And you saw on Saturday night, May 18, he stood up there at midnight in front of the cheering crowd and said, "I've always believed in miracles."
Yeah, I would love to get into Scott Morrison's belief in that, but I found it interesting you said at the start how the Daily Telegraph wanted you to write the how we won piece when no one was thinking like how they won. I imagine there'd be a fair few journalists that were trying to saddle up to the Labor camp in the last few days as well. So did you yourself think that Liberals would have it?
Well, we were asked to do that after the win. So,
after the win.
After the win.
Right.
But you're right. Yeah, look, I travelled on both the Morrison and the Shorten buses, and you sort of got that inkling from the ground that Bill Shorten was not being well received, especially in the sort of places that he was making out were his heartland. You know, there was a Fremantle, there was a shipbuilding yard where there were a whole lot of quite grumpy, sullen workers in high-vis vests and hard hats who were all assembled out to listen to the great man, and yet they were not at all interested in what he had to say. And some of them told me afterwards they weren't going to vote for him. He was just another union organiser come in to sort of gee up the blokes, is what they said, and he never delivered anything, has never done a day's work in his life. Whereas the feeling that you got from Scott Morrison, whether it was in Perth or in Tasmania, where he went about 7 times during the campaign to try and win Bass and Braddon, which he did, those Labor seats, or in New South Wales or in Queensland, the mood on the ground was really positive towards him, and also his wife, Jenny Morrison, who was just a reluctant campaigner to start with, but she really got into it, and her kind of warmth and natural attitude was really well received by people, everyone they met.
Yeah, so because it took me till about 8:30 on election night before I started to think the Liberals would have it. So you thought from talking to people, you thought things were looking pretty good for them.
Yes, and also I'd been talking to their strategists during the campaign who were talking through the marginal seat polling that they'd been getting from day one. They were pretty confident that there was what they called a path to victory. I mean, it all had to go right. There was no guarantee. No one was thinking it was in the bag, but it certainly wasn't the lay down misère for Bill Shorten that News Poll and most commentators were saying. They were quietly confident. It was just whether or not they were going to get enough seats to form government in their own right, or if they were going to have to, as the night before the election, Scott Morrison was confident that he would form government, but at that point he was saying, well, it might have to be with the help of 2 crossbenchers. Surprisingly, Andrew Wilkie was one of them, but he and Scott Morrison have an unusual friendship. They really quite like each other.
Yeah, that was a weird one out there where it's just like, oh, it's Bob Catter and Andrew Wilkie, which would be the buddy cop movie to save all buddy cop movies. But anyway, yeah, that's another thing I wanted to talk to you about was every poll was saying Labor was winning, and then after the election it's like, well, how do we do polling? But the Texter stuff was consistently showing the Liberals would win with a chance. Like, what were Texter doing differently that they were able to predict it right, but none of the other giants were able to?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, he talks a lot about, the quants and the numbers, and they've been doing it for a long time. They were just out in those marginal seats, and then they would send the data overnight to London, where it would get crunched by their quants, and then it would come back in the morning. And they had, they were consistently correct. For instance, they had, after the budget, the Back in Black budget, their primary vote bounced to over 40, which of course is the threshold for winning. And then from about January, this was Josh Frydenberg had spent the whole of his Christmas break writing these pungent economic articles, and Scott Morrison had been going around the country just being normal everyday dad, having a holiday with his kids, writing articles in the Daily Telegraph that were read by the so-called quiet Australians. He was just quietly getting on with business and slowly building his brand. And so by the end of January, their primary vote was up to 42, 43, and it didn't really leave that winning threshold for the rest of the campaign. So meanwhile, you had Newspoll, for instance, which is now run by Galaxy, which was also surprisingly doing the Labor Party polling, and there's some talk that, that was a real conflict of interest. But, if you notice, the published news polls have got enormous margins of error, 2.5%. They have small sample sizes. Really, a movement of 1 or 2 points is meaningless, and yet the media, all of us, have gotten into this habit, which I hope now is broken, of treating every tiny little point and half-point move as if it's some momentous indication of public sentiment when it's just within the margin of error.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to go back to the articles that Scott Morrison was writing, you mentioned one which was just talking about how he spent his holiday just going down and surfing. And you put that forward as like, this is the kind of thing that made Scott Morrison really stand out. So why did that article really stand out to... why did that article really connect with voters, do you reckon?
Well, look, it was part of his whole everyman pitch to Australians to say that I'm just like you, I'm a family man with a mortgage. And that really worked. This was an article where he went to Shoalhaven Heads with his family. He tweeted pictures of himself put on Facebook of, they had the trailer in the back with all the beach paraphernalia that families have. He talked about having fish and chips, for dinner like anyone else. So it was just part of him pitching himself as not the top end of town, as Bill Shorten had been, and Labor was going to pitch. They still had the same pitch that they had against Malcolm Turnbull, who was not an everyman. And so the top end of town rhetoric, which worked against Malcolm Turnbull, just fell flat with Scott Morrison. And he was at pains to show that he was just an everyday guy and that he understood people's concerns, that it was about aspiration, and it was about not being told what to do by government. And, he just focused on the economy, being a competent economic manager, because they knew from Textor's polling that was the number one, what's called equity or positive in their brand. Their number one negative in their brand was, of course, chaos and dysfunction, disunity from all the years of infighting. And, that was what Labor kept on hammering every single day. I don't think there was a day that I didn't hear Bill Shorten talk about chaos and disunity. But what Scott Morrison did very early on was very clever. He decided to neutralise that negative by going into the party room, and it was very difficult for him to extract this, but he managed to change the rules so that no leader can be dispatched, no prime minister can be dispatched by the party other than through an election. So that kind of neutralised that attack, and that's what he did. He was very clever, very on message. Anytime he's out in the field during the campaign and that issue was raised, which it often was, he would just say, we've changed the rules, and then he would pivot immediately to, this is a choice between me and Scott and Bill Shorten. You're going to have each one of us for 3 years because both our parties have learned the lesson and we've both changed the rules. You're stuck with us for 3 years. And that was the other part of his pitch. Do you want me or Bill Shorten? Because the big positive that they had was that Scott Morrison's personal brand consistently was way above Bill Shorten's. Bill Shorten was well known after 6 years as opposition leader and disliked by the public, not trusted. So that was a big plus. So all Scott Morrison did, it seems easy now, but he's just stayed on message. It was taxes, taxes, taxes. Labor's going to tax you to death, and bill, bill, bill.
Yeah, awesome. So one thing I definitely got out of your profile was that Scott Morrison is a man that enjoys a game of pool. There's a great photo of him playing pool. There's reference to a debate had at 10:30 on election eve whether to go back to a pub and play some more pool. Now, I know you weren't with him for that, but you were on the campaign trail. Did you see his pool game? How seriously does this man take his pool?
Look, he is the most amazing sports guy, but he's not that good at pool. That's about the only thing that he didn't really excel at. But, you saw him there in Corangamite at Torquay doing lawn bowls, and he just scored. He just did the first bowl. He scored something that's called Kissing the Kitty, which I'm told is like a hole-in-one in lawn bowls. Every time he picked up a ball or kicked a ball or played cricket or any type of sporting event, he seemed to manage to do extremely well. And I asked his wife about that. Even, for instance, when he had to toss a coin in those 3 debates, he always won.
Oh, that's how...
He was a very lucky. And I said to his wife, and she just said to him, she like totally in love with him still, having met him when she was 12. But she says, look, he's always good at everything. He's always won everything he's done. I can't beat him in any contest, and he's very competitive.
Right, okay. The other one I want to ask you, so you go out of your way, you and Shari in this article go out of your way to describe Yaron Finkelstein as bespectacled and John Kunkel as bald. Like, they just references to these things. What do those guys do to you?
No, it's just to try and, we're trying to write 6,000 words in a very short period of time and trying to enhance it with a little bit of colour. So that's just a cheap adjective.
What do we know about John Kunkel? Bald. All right, let's go with that.
Well, it is the most obvious feature that he has when you bump into him.
Fantastic. All right, let's move over to Labor. So you had an op-ed in the Daily Telegraph last week saying how Labor lost because it went woke. And you single out Emily's List. Now, what is Emily's List and why is it emblematic of Labor's mistakes?
Well, look, Emily's List is something that the Labor women sign up to, and then they get money, and like most of them are signed up to it, I think 3/4 of them. And if you sign up to Emily's List, that's really the only way to get ahead in the Labor Party. And you sign up to it, you sign up to abortion on demand. So it's saying, they're all very proud of themselves that they now have 50% females representation in the parliamentary party, but it's only a certain type of female. It's a woman that subscribes to their extreme feminist rhetoric. And, I don't think that shows diversity at all.
And one, for example, in the ALP National Platform, you mentioned there's 64 mentions of sexual orientation, 59 of intersex, 42 of LGBTI, 36 of transgender, and so on and so forth, but only 10 mentions of housing affordability, which I found to be a very interesting stat. So that really shows Labor's moving to areas that it didn't talk about like 20 years ago and moving away from areas that it did talk about.
Well, this is the tragedy for Labor, is that they really have moved so far left, or if identity politics down that line, that they're now not reflecting the hopes and aspirations of most of their voters. That national platform, which Bill Shorten, who's kind of the last of the old school right-wing leaders, he completely capitulated to this agenda, and he pretended during the campaign and before it that really Labor wasn't bound by any of this ridiculous stuff that was in their national platform, but they are. It is binding on a future national government, as anyone knows, for the Labor Party. And so it's obsessed by sexual politics, by identity politics, and that's just a path to division and disunity and disaster in terms of their electoral map. You saw in many places in Australia during the election, you saw the faith vote moving against Labor. In their heartland, for instance, in southwestern Sydney, you had, they're very safe seats. Tony Burke and Chris Bowen. Chris Bowen's talked about this, they had suffered in some of their booths 25-30% swings against them. And these are booths where people were disgruntled about the same-sex marriage vote, but even more disgruntled about the fact that since then it seems that their religious freedoms have been eroded, and all they got from Bill Shorten was, oh, well, you're a knuckle dragger, cave dweller, you're a hater that crawled out from under a rock. Insulting half the electorate 40% of people, of Australians, voted against same-sex marriage. Insulting half the electorate is not a recipe for electoral success, as we saw from Hillary Clinton and now from Bill Shorten.
I'm actually going to have to disagree with you because I thought it was quite clear that corporate leviathans and a financial behemoth was the reason that Labor lost, so not any of these other reasons?
Yeah, that's right. He's found a new reason. Yeah, he decided not to listen to Chris Bowen. But look, there were a number of reasons that they lost, and the faith vote was part of it. But really, it just showed how out of touch they were, that Labor has lost sight of what its core values were, what the party was founded on by, during a shearers' strike in outback Queensland. They don't, homelessness and, wages and all the things that they used to care about, what you thought of as Labor core values, seem to have been jettisoned in favour of this very fringe agenda, rainbow agenda, whatever you call it, which, it doesn't solve any problems.
Yeah, this talk on religious freedom leads me to the last thing I want to talk to you about. So the Israel Folau issue. So people listening to the show would have heard me and Pete talk about it in the past, and if you don't, So what's your take on it all? Like, is this a free speech issue or is it a breach of contract issue?
Well, I mean, it's a freedom of religion issue. This is a man who is a devout fundamentalist Christian, and he has quoted the Bible on his Instagram, and he has lost his job for it. And that sends a chill through all Christians. I mean, especially in rugby, where the majority of their players are, Pacific Islanders, and most of those are devout fundamentalist Christians like Israel Folau. And, I can't understand how badly Rugby Australia handled this. We now know that Raylene Castle told the sponsors like Qantas that Folau was going to be sacked before Folau knew. We now know that she sent a draft copy of the email that she was putting out to say that she was going to sack Folau. She sent a draft copy to Qantas for their approval before she sent it. So this is Rugby Australia absolutely kowtowing to, a few corporate virtue signalling woke merchants who have no right to do that to the game. I mean, it's really terribly destructive to the game and to Israel Folau himself. A very scary thing to do. This was the Israel Folau matter was the sort of drumbeat in the background of the election campaign. It didn't come up so much. I mean, it did in one debate, and then the dying days of the campaign, I think in desperation, Bill Shorten tried to bring it up to sort of trip up, use it as a wedge issue against Scott Morrison, who's a devout Pentecostal Christian, saying to him, you haven't said whether you think that homosexual people will go to hell. And of course, Scott Morrison said, well, I don't think that. But, outrageous that it should be dragged into the campaign as if somehow Christians who believe in the Bible are automatically bigots and homophobes.
Yeah, if you start bringing that up in the final days of a campaign, your campaign is not doing too well. No. I think we're getting away from the main issues.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Miranda...
But blame those corporate leviathans.
Oh, please. And the financial behemoth. Don't let the financial behemoth get away with it. All right, Miranda Devine, go out and... to all listeners, go out and read Miranda Devine and Sherry Markson's feature on the last days of the Morrison campaign. It is absolutely awesome. So Miranda, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.
All right. Okay, thank you to Grover Norquist and Miranda Devine for those interviews. All right, make sure you're going out and reading Miranda Devine's article. Awesome stuff. Now, let's fly through some stories that made us laugh this week, Pete. And, well, this one it doesn't so much make us laugh as mourn the fall of Western civilization as we know it. So tell us what happened.
Well, you are right. I think you might have even undersold it, actually. It's much more important than that. But a Richmond cheer squad member, now Richmond's a footy club here in Melbourne. The
best footy club.
James actually happens to follow.
Yeah, this isn't me. The man involved here is not me.
Well, actually, one of the questions I've got here is this you, James? But let's let the people decide.
Yeah.
So a man from the Richmond cheer squad was banned from sitting with the cheer squad for 3 weeks because he shouted at the umpire, "Be consistent, you green maggot." So
we're done.
Little worms.
This is it.
That we're talking about. Now, after the incident, the cheer squad also said it had a cultural awareness session, which, to be honest, wouldn't go astray with the Richmond fans.
I would love to be in that. In my head, they're still all wearing their Richmond gear, and a few of them have the flags, and they're just all sitting in the conference room talking about their feelings.
Yeah,
would be fantastic.
Pretty hammered and... Anyway, so they did that. They released a statement saying the football field is the umpire's place of work, and it is seen that any abuse directed towards them or any on-field official is deemed as workplace bullying. As if a Richmond
Can
fan
you
knows,
bully
but-
someone? It's not workplace bullying if you bully someone that just happens to be at their workplace, right? Like if I just ran in and gave the people in the building next to us a noogie, is that workplace bullying or is that just me being a jerk?
I don't know what a noogie is, but yeah, I mean, look, I'm not.
Do you know, like, you don't know Age of Empires, you don't know noogies. Did you even grow up? Like, noogies is
I
that
know
thing.
yeah, okay. So James is sort of rubbing his head. I know what that is, but I didn't know that it was called that. Anyway, look, I don't know about your question about workplace bullying. I'm actually, believe it or not an industrial relations lawyer. But so anyway, it was workplace bullying will not be tolerated, which, as I said, is pretty big words for a Richmond supporter.
Yeah, I'm just letting that slide.
Sorry, I've got one more thing here, and it's memo to fans. The Richmond Cheer Squad said members should refrain from making any derogatory comments towards anyone, be it on field or off.
Just never say anything bad ever again.
So that means, as I've got in my takes here, so my question was this James?
Still not.
James has already denied it, but the fact he denied it so quickly is pretty suspicious. Look, I think the big thing that the AFL's offended about is that they've said umpires should be consistent. Yeah. But that's the thing they're really upset about.
Yeah, I've got one. So basically, this guy would have got in a fair bit of trouble immediately after he yelled it. And I think that's what kicked all this off when he yelled, be consistent, you green maggot. What he should have just said was, I was actually directing that at Donald Trump, and then basically would have just been given a blue check mark and probably a corporate box seat with the AFL.
Well, he would have been brave if he did that. So.
And a round of applause for him. And no one would have been able to say anything bad about him because that's now banned.
Exactly right. And I think that's... So you literally can't bag the umpires.
You can't do it anymore.
Not even in a sort of by comparing them to a lovable insect.
Maggots, like, I know what the point you're making, but maggots aren't lovable.
I've met a few nice maggots. Anyway, that's where we're at.
Yeah, all right. Civilization is over. All right. But now, it is now June in 2019, and this makes it Pride Month. And Pride Month is a time, it's a very special time for a certain part of our community. It's a time where they can really feel accepted. And the part of the community that I'm talking about is corporate brands. Yeah. Because no one loves Pride Month more than corporate brands with a Twitter account. And every, like EB Games has changed. Like, basically, if you've been on social media in the last couple of days, you've seen at least one brand change their profile picture to the rainbow flag to show that they also see gay people as a marketable demographic. Now, Budweiser took it one step forward than Morris. So... So they're selling cups here. Is that the idea?
I thought it was cans.
Cans?
Like they're beer in a can. But
beer in a can. And they're doing different colours to show different parts of people's sexual preferences, I guess. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't gone down too well on Twitter. Okay. And there's been one in particular. So it's a black, grey, white can and purple on the bottom. And they say black is for asexuals who don't feel sexual attraction to anyone. Mm-hmm. Grey is for grey asexuals who sometimes feel sexual attraction.
That's everyone in the world.
Demisexuals who only feel it if they know someone well. White nods do non-asexual allies, and purple represents the whole community.
My favourite's the white one.
Yep, non-asexual allies.
That's like, these people are really horny, but they care about asexuals. It's like... they're like, no, I get horny all the time, but so that was my favourite.
No, well, you got my one, which is like, who sometimes feel sexual attraction is, like, that's everyone.
Yeah. Sometimes you feel sexual attraction, sometimes you don't.
Yeah. But yeah, my overall point being, brands just become in an incredible competition to see who could be the most woke on social media. And Budweiser this year, Budweiser gets to wear the trophy is the one that went a bit too hard.
Well, they should. I've actually got another good one here, James, which is very similar to the first one. Magenta is for same-sex attraction. Blue is for blue is for attraction to genders other than your own, and lavender, a mix of the two, represents attraction to your own and other genders, though some interpret it differently. Yeah.
So we're just doing this.
Every combo in the world, but in case we've missed any, some interpret it differently.
Yeah. So because you just know there was going to be someone with a Twitter account that just goes, well, I can actually this one, and just go, your definition there. Yeah. It's not up to code.
They could just put that in.
Yeah. Just say this beer is for every single demographic in the world equally. There you go.
Yeah, look, to be honest, if they just bunged a few rainbow flags on a few cans of beers, I would say, good on them, because gay people do get discrimination in a lot of communities around the world, but feels to me that they've overcomplicated the matter.
All right, now let us talk another thing that's happening right now, which is Donald Trump has touched down in London.
Sorry, I'll skip forward. Yeah, no, Donald Trump the Don has landed, as they say. They don't say it, but he has.
Peter's been saying it.
Yeah. So he's gone to London. He's been waiting for a state visit to the UK for his whole presidency, right?
Yeah,
Like an official visit, get to meet the Queen, all that stuff. Blah,
right.
blah, blah.
I don't know if he's been waiting for it. It's not like I'm not dealing with any of these other things until this comes through.
He's been looking
That's
out
the
for-
ultimate sign of validation.
Yeah.
Until I meet the Queen, this has all been for naught.
That's all right. That's right. So he's obviously, Sadiq Khan, the Lord Mayor of London, has come out and written this big piece in The Guardian about how, we shouldn't speak to Donald Trump as Britain. And even though it's an important relationship, Donald Trump's a fascist. And, blah, 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 blah. He's got a few quotes in there, which is pretty funny. Obviously, everyone went to town on the fact that Sadiq has missed out on a few crucial state visits to the UK where he's remained silent, such as Xi Jinping, who's done a few dodgy things, as being in charge of China, the Saudi prince. And also, he defended Louis Farrakhan, the anti-Semitic American coming to Britain. So that was, it's all coming out now, Sadiq.
Yeah.
So that didn't go well for him.
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw Donald Trump's response to what Sadiq Khan
I
has
was
been
just
saying.
getting into that.
Okay, cool. Take us away.
Okay, so Trump, just as he was landing at Stansted, said, referred to Sadiq Khan as a stone-cold loser. I don't know what he means by that. That's sort of leaving, he's mincing his words
Well,
there.
probably means loser.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And he goes on in a
I don't think it's a compliment.
It's not a compliment. He goes on in a subsequent tweet to say, Khan reminds me very much of our dumb and incompetent mayor of NYC, de Blasio, who has also done a terrible job.
Yeah,
So,
which is such an all-time sideways snipe. Like, de Blasio's just going about his day and suddenly, well,
what is
Jesus.
this? Yeah, for once, Trump saying what he thinks on Twitter.
Yep.
So, look, that's what's happened. There's meant to be a protest with 250,000 people in London coming up.
Interesting you should mention the protest beat, because
Yeah.
the protest has also heralded the return of possibly the world's most overrated thing, which is the Trump baby.
Oh, yeah, the Trump baby.
That Trump baby, people make it out to be the biggest balloon in the history of the planet.
Yeah.
It is like 2 people wide.
Is it?
Yeah, if you see it on the ground, it is a very, very small thing.
Yeah. Well,
So every article that gets written about the Trump baby, like I saw the Museum of London wants to put in their political section, like the Trump baby. You have no idea how crappy this thing is. If it was like it could engulf a street and, one finely thrown paperclip could envelop a suburb of London in this like deflated baby, then we can talk about museumizing it. Until then, that's the present tense of being put in a museum.
Okay.
And until then, I'm not spending any time on it while people are getting torn to pieces in far north Queensland.
Yeah. Nah, look, it's just up there. It's up there with the witty banners, like massively overrated.
Yes.
What else did I have here? Oh, look, I liked it. Sadiq Khan, he tackles the big issues. It was his government that said that cycling in London was too white, male and middle class.
Yeah.
So this guy speaks truth to power.
Yeah, he does. Has he done anything about the surge in knife crime?
Oh, look, I don't know, but that's...
Has he done anything about London overtaking New York as the murder capital?
That's not important, James. What's important is that...
Trump babies and cyclists.
too many fat old white blokes riding bikes around London. Anyway.
All right, cool. Last story we got here. So the Indian elections just came through. So we talked about that briefly in Hey, What Did I Miss last week. Make sure you subscribe to that. One story that's come out, Pete, which was a little sad. It did go viral. It was a little sad. An independent candidate from the Indian state of Punjab managed to make himself known around the world after a video of him crying and telling a reporter that he only received 5 votes in the recent Indian general elections despite having 9 family members.
Ooh, that's pretty brutal.
It's a tough one. Now, there is a happy ending, so we should point out this because we are about to make fun of this situation and we don't want to sound like jerks. Happy ending, the guy actually gets 856 votes, which I've been told through Google research is actually a fair amount for this. That guy has overshot expectations.
Yeah.
Maybe people saw the clip and then voted for him just to be like, come on, man, you got it. But anyway, gets 856 votes.
Yeah.
We don't know, but likely that includes his 9 family members. We can't rule that in or rule that out at this stage. So, happy ending. But, Pete, this leads me to my first question.
Okay.
Could you guarantee that your entire family would vote for you?
Nah, probably not. My brother wouldn't vote for me because he's a troll. But
And then he'd send you a photo of you not voting for you.
Didn't like your platform. But I think that I could get, a few mates to vote for me. I could get more than 5. Of course, we had Fraser Anning with 19 votes.
Yep.
So, I mean, who's got only 19 mates?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the question. If I went for the election, I'd get more than 19 votes. I'd get 43.
I want the full list of people.
Okay, I'll get you that list.
At the end of the show. Cool. All right, did you have anything on this? Because I had another follow-up question.
So we should point out that Neetu Shuttaranwala is illiterate. So he's a literate independent candidate, got 856 votes, which is a great effort. His family did come out and make a statement which says, He has complete support from the family and everyone, including our uncles and the extended family, has voted for him, said his brother. So they did vote for him.
Yep.
And the journo jumped the gun.
That was going over the board by saying extended uncles. It's just like, you have no idea how much our family supports this guy.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
There are uncles that have never met him
Yep.
that would definitely vote for him based on how loving our family is.
Doth protest too much, whatever that saying is.
Yeah.
Surely a couple of them would have said, I'm sick of Nito, I'm not voting for him, he's an idiot.
Now, well, Pete, speaking of family voting for each other, I like
Okay.
to think of us as a podcast family.
Okay.
Now, would you vote for me?
Well, it would depend what your platform was, all the rest of it.
All right, well,
Probably.
chilling.
But I mean,
A chilling indicator.
because I don't want to be on the wrong side of history. Like, you could go on and do anything in the future, and I'm on record saying I'd vote for you. You got to be careful in this day and age, James.
All right, well, this is a schism. And Pete and I are going
Would
to
you
have
vote
to
for me?
see you guys next week.
You know I cherish you.